What are the hazards posed by methyl isocyanate to human life?
Methyl isocyanate can pose a great deal of harm to humans from even short-term exposure. It is a colourless gas that can be taken in through skin and through inhalation. The gas does have a strong odour, but this shouldn't be relied on, as human smell cannot dictate the concentration of MIC that they have inhaled into their lungs. Symptoms of people affected by methyl isocyanate can include skin irritation, damage to the eyes, breathing difficulties, particularly to people with respiratory issues, and could be fatal if inhaled in large concentrations. Finally, the chemical is extremely flammable. If traces of MIC were brought into a house in Bhopal and a fire was started, this would ignite the vapour and could cost lives and extensive damage to people in homes.
Has the response to the Bhopal disaster been effective?
33 years have passed since the Bhopal disaster in 1984. Basic clean-up methods, such as attempts to contain the source of the methyl isocyanate, have been used, but there is still a large concentration of the lethal gas still present. With approximately 5,000 people that had died from the inhalation of the gas, it would have been expected that the inhabitants of Bhopal had evacuated and found alternative accommodation in another town. However, this was not the case. A large proportion of the population of Bhopal have remained in these toxic grounds, unable to accumulate enough money to find a different and less harmful place to stay. Roughly 500,000 people continue to inhale the decreasing concentration of MIC to this very day. However, lifelong injuries are held for a large percentage of people, including deformities in children from mothers that have inhaled MIC, permanent blindness, lung disease, and lots of other harmful symptoms that could have been averted had the Indian government had responded better.
In contrast with phosgene, MIC was stored in 3 vast tanks, originally buried in a concrete bunker near the edge of the plant. 40 feet long and 8 feet in diameter, each was capable of holding 42 tons of the potentially lethal chemical. Where phosgene was a famous killer kept in small quantities, MIC was stored on a scale that would kill thousands. "8:45. The pipes that were being washed started to become choked with the dirt being carried by the water. The nozzles became blocked and water began to back up, flowing into one of the main pipe systems that ran throughout the plant. With water flooding the pipes, time was running out. The tank should have been protected from contamination, but a catalogue of failures was about to have the most terrible consequences for the people of Bhopal. There was a leaky valve connecting the tank to the plant's main pipe system. If gas could get out, then water could get in. By approximately 10 o'clock, the contamination had started.
What were the immediate environmental impacts?
Within a few days, trees in the vicinity became barren and animal carcasses had to be disposed of. 2,000 buffaloes, goats and other animals were collected and buried. Fishing was prohibited, causing further food supply shortages. Formal statements were issued that air, water, vegetation and some food were safe, but not fish.
How does the factory being a pesticide plant make it impact the environment?
Pesticide plants create substances such as herbicides and insecticides, which are meant to control pests by deterring, disabling or killing them. Pesticides are already a controversial topic, with some studies showing health effects ranging from irritation of the skin and eyes to more serious effects such as birth defects, cancer and even death. Studies also show environmental effects with the use of pesticides reducing biodiversity, destroying habitats and threatening endangered species, and also contributes towards water pollution. Over 95% of sprayed insecticides and herbicides reach a destination other than their target species, such as other species, air, water and soil. The costs due to health and environmental effects are substantial, with the United States having to pay $9.6 billion annually.
Were samples taken from the surrounding area?
Multiple tests of the groundwater in the area around the plant have been taken since 1989 and almost always concluded that the samples taken were toxic to fish and in general have been at dangerous levels. Of course, the samples have become less polluted over time, but the issue wasn't addressed until recently. On the 8th of June 2012, the Centre for Incineration of Toxic Bhopal Waste agreed to pay $3.9 million to dispose of UCIL chemical plants waste in Germany in order to provide safe drinking water for the area around the plant.
The disaster impacted both UCC and the city of Bhopal economically. Union Carbide paid out $470 million to the Indian government, which was then distributed amongst the 554,895 people impacted, with the average amount of $2,200 being paid to the family of the deceased. However, the impacts on the Union Carbide have been in general quite short term, as the stocks of the company did initially fall, but eventually rose back up to higher than they were initially. The economic impacts on the city of Bhopal, however, have been more severe, as many of the people are unable to work for more than a few hours a day due to the injuries sustained in the leak. This means they have less disposable income and many of the local shops go out of business. This has led to Bhopal not going through the same economic boom that much of India has, demonstrating that the devastating disaster is still holding back the city over 30 years on. How were Union Carbide held responsible for the incident?
Really, Union Carbide didn't see any consequences until 1989. In 1989, the Indian Supreme Court approved a settlement for $470 million to be distributed amongst the survivors of the disaster. However, until recently, only $330 million was yet to be distributed. The whole case has been in and out of court for the last 30 years, as people think Union Carbide didn't see enough punishment for what they had done to the people of Bhopal. There were many petitions and marches throughout the years trying to urge a reopening and re-evaluation of the case. Almost all of these were dismissed by the Indian court due to clauses in the 1989 settlement that barred the reopening of the case at a later date. The latest mass petition was in 2010, many years after the event. The government and people started a petition to reopen the case as they felt the long-term effects of the environment and people and the sheer number of people affected was underestimated at the time of the case. Like all the others, it was dismissed by the Indian court.
Were any individuals brought to justice?
In June 2010, 7 high-up Indian Union Carbide executives were found guilty of criminal negligence and were sentenced to 2 years in prison and fined $10,000. But realistically, this only accounted for a small amount of their earnings, so it wouldn't have been much of a problem for them. But in August 2010, a petition was made, it's only months later, for harsher sentences, and it sought to change their charges from negligence to homicide. The High Court rejected the petition and declined to reopen the case anyway.
The locals believe that their own government in Madhya Pradesh have been negligent towards the victims, and the Congress have been no better. They also believe that both parties have been indifferent to the gas victims, as they have been eager to protect Anderson from the Indian law. This is because the Congress allowed Anderson to leave on the 7th of December. Another reason is when the BJP was in power, the Home Ministry under Advani tried to reduce the charges against him from manslaughter to negligence. This would have made his extradition to India from the US for his trial impossible.
Were there any other reasons for the locals to be angry?
Bhopal gas victims weren't actually included in party manifestos until 2010, which was 26 years after the incident occurred.
In conclusion to this documentary, it can be said that the response made to the Bhopal gas disaster has not been effective. Tackling the ongoing issue of the 42 tonnes of methyl isocyanate that was released 33 years ago shows the lack of care and attention given by the Indian government. This toxic gas still looms in the struggling town of Bhopal. Whilst plenty of international attention has been given to Bhopal, not enough has been given nationally. Union Carbide refused to accept any responsibility to what appeared to be the worst industrial disaster of the 20th century, alongside Chernobyl and Seveso.